Yep. See that trigger?
Yeah.
See that red button right there?
Yeah.
You know what that means?
Brad isn't on here yet.
It's the Tom and Trigger Show. Hey, we're going to... Wait.
Yep.
We're supposed to do a little idle chit-chat. Are we doing idle chit-chat?
Yeah.
We're waiting for Brad. Actually, we're stalling here.
Stalling.
We could be stalling till like 10 o'clock tonight. You never know. But at this point, we're gonna what are we gonna do? Oh, we're gonna do this. We're gonna see if this works. Here we go. Here's my new Funkadelic
Mac
DeMarco intro. Hey, that's Brad is breaking into our intro. Dang,
is he? All right,
Brad. We were just doing the intro, dude.
Oh, am I interrupting something, Tom?
Yes.
Yeah, we're kind of having a swinging party. Actually, I don't think you'll be able to hear this, right? But I'll do it again anyway. Anyway, now we'll do this. We're doing Dan's intro. Here we go.
Welcome and good evening, everyone, to another edition of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. And now, here are your hosts, Tom and Brad.
And Trigger. Whew! Did that sound newsy or what?
Yes.
Tanya says groovalicious.
I feel official.
Do you?
Yes.
See, you can't see the chat room really good. Tanya's in there. She says groovalicious.
All right.
Oh, just think about
making up new words like dumbassery.
Yeah. I was just gonna say I have Tanya with me next week, and I'm gonna get her to say dumbassery or something like that to try to embarrass herself. That was so cute when she did that week. So anyway, hey, welcome to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Don't everybody talk at once.
I thought they were going to say hi.
Yeah. Are you there with us, Brad?
I'm there with us, Brad.
Okay, so it's going to be Tom, Brad, and Trigger tonight on the Tom. We should come up with a new show name. Tom, Brad, Trigger Show. I don't know.
TBT?
Anyway, yeah, TBT.
Or the Lone Ranger.
The Lone Ranger. How you doing tonight, Brad?
I'm doing great. I'm a little rushed. Sorry, I'm just sliding in from a long day of work.
Ooh. That sounds really bad, long day at work.
It's not been bad.
Hey, no snow in Minneapolis, right?
Flurries. It's been great.
Yeah.
Flurries.
I woke up this morning, it was completely white here. So,
Seriously?
Yeah.
Yep, and then one minute you look outside, sun is out, shining, no wind, no snow, and then it, just...
Yeah. Oh, Tanya says, oh, great, the goal is now to embarrass me. Yes, it is, Tanya.
It's the dumbassery of the show.
Yeah. Since you're the only person in the chat room, Lisa says she's going to be joining you here shortly. So anyway, shall we get the show started, boys? Brad, do you have your docket available?
I do. Welcome to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show.
There you
folks. My name is Brad, and then tonight I'm joined by my good friends Tom and Trigger, as he's so well known.
Yeah, and no name.
Tonight's episode is entitled Free Market Environmentalism. And thanks for joining us. And I'm shaking in my boots because this is one that, this is a subject where I think, as I look back in time, was really paramount to my learning and figuring out liberty and my perspective on it and how important it is to see things openly. How about that?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting topic. I think it's...
Can I say that? I don't even know what Tom has planned. I mean, I do, but I don't. You know?
He's always shooting from the hip.
I'm a hip shooter. No, and Trigger saw it too a couple times, this Walter Block on YouTube. Actually, I think it was entitled Free Market Environmentalism. Hence, that's where I got the name. Pretty swift, aren't I? Anyway, I see Lisa's in the chat room. Welcome to the chat room. So now there's someone else to chat with Tanya in there. I'm typing right now. So into the chat. I like to interact with the people in the chat room because I think they get an interesting conversation going on there. Anyway, I watch a Walter Block, and what was he... he was talking about, he was having a debate with, we'll just call him a statist. I can't remember the fellow's name, but Walter Block kind of started his pitch, and I can't remember if he said this was towards the end or this at the beginning when he did his pitch. This guy, he just burst out laughing.
It's within the first 3 minutes,
Okay,
I think.
so was it the beginning?
Yeah.
Because when he said, hey, the free market is actually, people think it's contrary to the environment, or they're opposed, the two ideas. You can either have free market and pollution, or you can have, I don't know what you call it, some kind of hampered market or complete closed market and a clean environment. And he was saying, obviously said that's not the case. They're not diametrically opposed. They're compatible, actually, and it's actually the best strategy for having a clean environment. And this guy just burst out laughing, and he was going through the explanation that this guy actually didn't burst out laughing because he was trying to make fun of Dr. Block or his position. It's that it was honestly his reaction that he thought, well, that's just, so absurd. And of course, he did this before Walter Block could make his case. So that's what we're going to partly do tonight, I think, is try to make the case and make you think about it. And I'm hoping I'll have that same effect on Brad. Because I think by trigger, you watch this.
Not a chance, by the way.
Not a chance. All right, that boy. I like that closed mind.
And if you don't switch on your own, we'll beat it in you.
Yes, we'll resort to the tactics of the state.
Ray Rice.
We're going to Ray Rice you, he says. At Triggers, watch us like at least the Walter Block thing like 3 times or so.
Once, like 2 weeks ago, and then I started watching it. I watched it one full time today, and then a couple times I went back and I had to go over because I was spacing out a little bit here and there. So I went back and watched it like certain spots. So basically 2 times I watched it.
Okay.
Today.
So Trigger's kind of on it. So let me...
Glassworks paid me for it.
Glassworks paid. All right, so here we go. Let me give you the backdrop on the show. I support that everyone should be free to pursue his or her own life interest, provided that such pursuit is a peaceful one, right? I'm basically saying it's simple. I'm going with Tanya. She's saying it's kindergartnerism. Simple. It's unjust to initiate force against another. Right? Most are untroubled at this point with the idea, but to determine if force is being initiated against another, you got to establish property rights, right? And I'm an advocate of property rights rooted in self-ownership. And not just because I think it's a good idea, that's a big part of the show, is that it's rooted in man's nature, right? So it's fundamental. It's part of very existence, whether we recognize it or not. I made that analogy many times. It's like gravity. You can say, hey, it doesn't actually act on me, but it still does. You can not understand how it works, but it still acts on you, right? You can deny it. You can do whatever you want. It still acts on you. Why? Because it's part of nature, and I'm arguing this is actually part of nature, but that's not where I really want to go with this whole show. But think about it. If you don't own yourself, I think it's very difficult to conceive of how you could own anything else, right? And I think so far that stuff's not so foreign. But I'm going to jump to where we're going on this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. And we're going to ask a big question here. And the question basically is, and this actually comes from Carla Fiorina, which I'll get into more later, former, I think, CEO or muckety muck at HP. The question is man intended to master the environment? Okay, what I mean is man here to use the resources to make his life as comfortable or as enjoyable as possible, right? Or should man be in a position where he does all he can do to preserve the planet in a condition as close to, possible as essentially zero impact, right? And I have a caution here. Just this, it's sort of a trick question. I let the cat out of the bag. I know you're not supposed to do that in professional radio, but since we're not being paid, this isn't professional, right? So the other questions are, and I think they're actually very big questions. What is the effect of the state actions on the environmental condition? And we look at free market environmentalism on this episode and how the incentives to pollute or not to pollute would be different and favor an improved environment in a free society. So we'll talk about this and more in the feature story tonight. So we just hope that you listen in on the discussion. Of course, join us in the chat. Ask your questions there. And above all, as Brad says, we intend on making you think. So with that, we'll let Brad go with the announcements for the evening.
And we hope that you will not only think, but just be open-minded to challenging yourself.
Yeah.
What we always want. So, announcements. AgriFest 2015 is at the Villa Marie Conference Center and retreat September 24th to 27th. And where's that again, Tom? That's in...
Frontenac is the nearest town. It's like by Rochester, Minnesota.
Exactly.
Essentially right on the river.
It's right between Red Wing and Lake City.
That's it. Save the date. Great time. Lots of good thinking going on there. Watch Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do, Episode 8, What's a Fair Start, from Harvard Business School by Michael Sandel.
By the way, I just watched that a couple days ago. That's another awesome episode. They're all fantastic. I would encourage everyone to watch those. There's 12 ultimately, but I'm just through 8 of them. Very good stuff. It really makes you think. He asks the right questions. Sorry.
Okay. And just following up on last week's show, we would encourage you to watch the movie. There's a documentary called Citizen 4. Last week's show was the surveillance state episode.
Yeah.
And pretty darn interesting stuff. I thought that was a good show, interesting conversation.
Absolutely.
Our next live show will be next Tuesday evening, April 28th at 7 p.m. The planned topic is free-range children, and the Northwoods mom will be joining us again. We look forward to another great topic and discussion with Tanya, who's way better at being Tom's co-host than I'll ever be. But we always love having her join us.
Oh, yeah. She's a lot of fun. Very smart. Interesting gal and busy person with 7 kids at home.
Yes, the Northwoods mom family are some outstanding folks. Mm-hmm. Even Northwoods mom's husband, I'll say.
He has a name. His name is Lucas, by the way.
I know. It's having a little fun toying around with the topic.
Is the FBI or CIA after him, and that's why we got to just call him the Northwoods mom husband?
Right. I don't know.
All right.
So, and then the chat room, as Tom has already talked about, is open.
Sweet. So join us in the chat room. If you get to Spreaker.com, if that's how you're listening to us tonight, there's a little icon in there. I don't know, like a dialogue, icon. I don't know how to explain it. Click on that thing and the chat room will open. I think there's probably a number 2 or 3 in there because there's 2 or 3 people in the chat right now. But with that, we're going to have Trigger do the quote of the day. Trigger.
All right, the quote of the day is by Lysander Spooner. A man is nonetheless a slave because he is allowed to choose a new master once in a term of years.
See, I say that's a slam on democracy right there. That's the way I take it.
Yep, and this guy was... When did he die?
It was after the Civil War because he was a big abolitionist. It
was like 100
plus years ago.
Yeah, and he knew it was a sham back then.
Yes. Actually, we're 150 years. I don't know.
60.
100. I don't know.
Right around there.
I can't. Math eludes me. I can't handle that. Adding, subtracting. That's tough. Okay. Anyway, you got that? Any more comments on your buddy Lysander Spooner? Are you all good there, Trigger?
I'm good for right now.
Okay, sweet. Brad, back to the news. Oh, there's a couple things that I added in there, Brad.
I got a couple too. So.
Oh, sweet. All right, I'll let you. If you're comfortable with it, just go with it, and I'm gonna, of course, always reserve the right to chime in.
You are not allowed, Tom.
Well.
So one of the things that you have is that America will spend more on taxes in 2015 than it will on food, clothing, and housing combined.
Is that just, I don't know, that astonishes me a little bit.
To that point, a bit is related. I think one day last week, I think I saw on one of the news programs over the weekend, maybe it was last Wednesday or Thursday, was the Freedom Day, if you will, when most people then start to get to keep their money going forward from that day, as opposed to the taxes that they're going to pay.
Think about that. That's a lot of cash.
Yep.
Oh, I mean, what is that? A third of the year, somewhere in there.
Yep.
Oh, I mean, that's full. Okay.
So some additional points on that. In 2015, America will pay $3.3 trillion with a T in federal taxes and $1.5 trillion with a T in state and local taxes for a total tax bill of, drumroll, 4.8.
Sorry, that's the best I could do.
A little late there.
I'm not going to ask how you made that drum roll.
Oh, okay.
$4.8 trillion, or 31%. Back to your last point, 31% of national income. Additionally, food comprises about 1.8 trillion, clothing about 2.5 billion with the B, and housing about 2.2 trillion for a total of 4.25 trillion versus 4.8 trillion in taxes.
Wow, that's the numbers just boggle the mind. I can't really get my head around trillion.
Sobering stuff there.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
Crazy. That's where we've gotten ourselves to, but that's another story. Okay.
Next point that you have is former Florida Senator and former head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Bob Graham. And this is something that Tom shared with me. And it was a guy's name, Stephen Smith.
Shepard Smith, Fox News.
Smith.
And I'm not a Fox News fan, but that's where the story came from regardless.
And who knew Fox News would be blowing the whistle on kind of biting the hand that feeds them a little bit, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, they're not normally anti-state, shall we say.
Yes,
or
that's what I meant to say, yep.
I'm going to argue that they don't see it necessarily as anti-state, because the little I know about Shepard Smith, he's actually a fairly strong statist, but I think he sees these as just government snafus. He just sees it as kind of a screw up or, a couple guys got a little overzealous,
Well, and as a sidebar to that, I think that the guys at work now are like, okay, so Brad, are you going to go home to your bunker tonight? Is that what you're going to do? Because I'm a little outspoken about some things, such as this particular article. But I think our point that we're trying to make is that yes, these are government snafus. They're horrendously obnoxious and embarrassing. If there's truth to this story, and we'll get to what the story is here in just a second. But I think what we want to provoke with folks is to think and go, why in the world are we letting this go on like this?
Yes, I would argue this is not a snafu. This is not a couple guys ran amok. I would actually argue that the incentives are in place in this system for this to happen. So this specific case, I can't tell you was expected. But what I'm saying is the abuse is actually expected because the system has the wrong incentives in place. It does not have the incentives in place for people in those positions, those office holders, to do what most of us would call the right thing.
Right.
And that's my argument with the system. The incentives are messed up. But
well, whether it's an incentive or whether there's nobody guarding the chicken coop.
Yeah.
There's no one that's going to keep them on track or keep them honest or true or what have you. I mean, we prove that week in and week out.
Yes, I think, and that's, but as you've mentioned before, I think a lot of people recognize something's wrong. They don't really have their finger on it. We're trying to help them put their finger on it. But I still think it's necessary to point out where the system has flaws is not really the right word, but has false incentives in place. So you can never really expect it to perform the way I think a lot of people think it should perform.
Yep.
And that's obviously why I'm where I'm at. But let's get back to this.
Yes.
This thing, and I'm going to play, which I think if I remember right, Brad, you won't be able to hear this, but this is going to last 44 seconds, so I'll drop in as soon as it's done.
That's cool.
But this is Shepard Smith basically telling us what this story is, and I know we've been kind of weird about it, but here goes. I'll let Shepard Smith do it because he can do it better than I can. He's paid professional. We're unpaid non-professionals. Here we go.
Saudi Arabian government paid to help fund the attacks of 9/11. The FBI knows it, and the FBI covered it up. That's off some freaky website, right? Not this one. This one is the claim of the former senator from Florida, Senator Bob Graham, who was on the Intelligence Committee. Not some quack conspiracy theorist, but the former head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He co-wrote a congressional report on the attacks of 9/11, and he says classified pages, 28 classified pages of that report, could help prove his damning allegations. In an interview with none other than the New York Times newspaper, Senator Graham of Florida said he'll fight to prove his claims.
Okay, so there was a lot in there, and I don't want to. We could do a whole half hour just on talking about this real quick, but craziness. Just the basic notion is, the assertion is that Bob Graham says the FBI knows that the Saudi government, not some Saudi sheikhs and some, I don't know, influential guys, the government of Saudi Arabia backed the guys who did the 9/11 attacks knowingly, not unknowingly. He's saying they did it knowingly. And then the question comes, he's going to have Napolitano on this. I don't know, it's almost a 7-minute segment here. I only played you 44 seconds of it. But Napolitano says, hey, part of the problem is, well, they get to the point where, well, if this is actually true, then that had to be an act of war by Saudi Arabia on the United States, right? I mean, I don't know how it couldn't be if it was actually true.
But now, isn't that what I've told you about this before?
Oh, yeah, you're drinking. No, I'm drinking, actually.
I'm drinking. Remember? Now, isn't Saudi Arabia, don't we want to put an oil pipeline through Saudi Arabia? And
no, that's Turkey.
No, they want to go through Saudi.
Saudi has the oil. We just want to they have the pipelines to the shore so they can ship it out of there.
Yeah, and they won't let us.
I don't know about that because it's their land. Whatever. Okay.
Oh, come on now.
Yeah.
I watched an article on it.
But no doubt, the United States and Saudi Arabia has different motivations for doing the stuff they want to do. But why, if this is true, and the FBI knows this, obviously somebody told them to cover it up, to withhold it. Again, only if this is true, why would they do that? Obviously for somebody wants the United States to remain friends. I'm using that in quotes with the Saudis, because if this is true, how can you remain friends with somebody who attacked you?
Right. How good of friends are they?
Right. This whole thing is. The other thing I just want to comment on very quickly about Shepard Smith's reporting. He says this is not from some quack conspiracy theorist. Well,
This isn't off the Inquirer or whatever.
Right.
Tabloid.
But I actually take offense to that. Because in a lot of cases, whistleblowers, Snowden, are at least initially saying, well, who's this dude? He doesn't know anything. What's he talking about? Right? They're seen a lot of times as quacks. The whole point is, so what? Let's say I'm I guess I am a known quack, right? But I could still say something that's true, right? And people will discount it because I'm a known quack. And I realize that happens, but I'm saying, why don't we look at the evidence or what he's asserting and, how he progresses in getting this public to determine that, in other words, they're putting him because he's a senator, I would argue because he won a popularity contest or 2 or 3, I don't know how many times he got elected or reelected into that position and other ones. They put him on that he's more reputable than, I don't know, Edward Snowden. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? And again, I know I view this differently than a whole lot of the planet, but I'm saying, we had Jacob Hubert on, whatever that was, a while back, a year and a half ago or more, and he was agreeing with me saying, hey, this system draws the worst of our society to it. So now he's putting him up on a pedestal. And again, I know he's a statist and that's the way he sees it. But I'm just saying, I just want to point that out about his reporting is my point. So again, information comes from, in many cases, the least likely sources, at times where you don't see that it's going to be coming from there, and then they question it. And I'm all good with questioning it. I'm not saying don't question stuff. I'm just saying don't give him put him on a higher pedestal than anyone else right from the get-go. To me, that doesn't follow.
And so you're also saying that possibly we should be even that much more suspect about what former Senator Graham's motive could be.
Yeah, and maybe his motives are completely pure. Again, I don't know. I don't know the man other than, I know he was a former senator of Florida and the Senate Intelligence Committee, blah, 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 right? But the bottom line is I don't know the guy. So it's
back to the point of the story is you have him saying this. The FBI, is covering it up now. They're not releasing the information.
Yeah.
And they're going back and forth. There's no transparency for any of us that are not with either organization.
That's how you do it in a free society, by the way, Brad.
Right. And I think there's, what was in the story, there was like 8,000 or 80,000 pages or something.
I believe it was 80,000. And he's really working on like 28 pages, getting them out or something like that. I can't
27 or 28 pages. It spans 2 presidents.
Yes.
And including Bush and Obama, and that this is they're trying to get they want these 28 pages released, but now no one's wanting to do that.
Yeah, we'll post the link on the Facebook page after the show, so you can listen to it again. It's 6 minutes and 47 seconds or something on YouTube. Listen to it yourself, the whole thing. He gets Judge Napolitano on there to talk about stuff too. So it's actually very interesting.
Might be interesting for you to check out. And again, it doesn't take very long to watch.
Facebook.com/KnowingPeasantRadio. It'll be on there in an hour or two.
Hey, Tom, what's the name of our show?
Knowing Peasant Radio show.
Yeah, hey, that's what you're listening to, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for listening, by the way.
Absolutely.
Hey, do you have any more news stories on? Do you want
a couple?
All right, well, fire it up, Holmes.
So one of our favorite things to criticize, not that we're very particular about criticizing, being very selective on criticism sometimes, but did you hear that the head of the DEA, Michelle, can't think of her last name, is now going to be stepping down, taking the fall, or I'm not sure we'll never know the political motive or what led to this. But because of some of the behaviors that have been happening within her agency,
I did not hear that.
That just was announced today.
Yeah, and again, was there so much pressure on the agency? Somebody offered her a golden parachute to just go away. Did somebody, on the inside, a contributor, a lobbyist, a blah blah, whatever, all the connections that are with industry? Did somebody just offer her a sweet job to get her out of there as a favor to another senator or somebody else?
Yep.
And I'm not saying that actually happened. I'm just saying these are all possibilities, and who knows what the motivations of these people are and what's all going on.
Maybe she just wants to quit and be a shepherd. I don't know.
Maybe she does. It's quite possible. But I think asking there's nothing wrong with asking these questions. I guess that's my point.
Or at least maybe looking at, not conspiratorially, but looking at the story and go, I wonder what the motivation, like you've just elaborated on, was with this. How did this come about?
Exactly.
And it often doesn't come about for no reason.
Exactly. There's usually some reason. That could be, I don't know, we'll call it irrational, but it happens. Anyway, okay, that's cool. That's interesting. I like that one. Got something else?
Yep. Just I was listening to Public Radio today, and we're always talking about government and people, corporations, special interests using the government to be their big stick to get their way.
Yes.
And I'm not shooting darts. I welcome anybody to believe and worship and whatever you want to do with whatever you want and to whomever you want to worship. But whatever religion and beliefs and what have you. But I was listening to a documentary about the Catholic Archdiocese in the state of Minnesota. And one of the things that, with the child abuse and all the things that have taken place that's have all come out in public over the last number of years. And at one point, they were under such scrutiny and such a challenge position in the state of Minnesota within this diocese walls. I think they had already doled out like $8 million or something like that. and the cover-up was continuing. And so they actually rallied the legislature, or tried to get something sponsored in the legislature that exonerated or would cap them at a certain settlement amount to help them, to make it a state law that would say you can't get any more damages per person than this.
Right. That's actually a good one, because believe it or not, part of the show is going to go to the Exxon Valdez and what might have been underlying the risks that Exxon took. And it has to do with liability limitations as well. Never a good thing in my view, but
no.
Interesting.
Yes.
Cool. Thanks for bringing that to us.
Shirley.
Quit calling me Shirley.
Thank you for playing.
Oh.
And the last one I've got is I'm so half-baked on, even more half-baked than those two. I'm going to let that go by, and we'll talk about it next week.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, I'm going to get going here because we got a lot of ground to cover. As you know, we had every stinking show. We got to figure out how to get this down. But anyway, interesting stuff tonight, I think. But with free market environmentalism, I got kind of intrigued with the California drought situation, right? Because there's a lot of environmental stuff in there. And so I think it's very interesting. And where it really got started was, I guess, in two places. I saw a couple of videos of Governor Jerry Brown announcing and talking about the penalties that will now be associated with not conserving water. And I get it. That's very vague, but that's a general idea, right? So he's putting the force of the state behind the effort to conserve water. And most people don't have a big problem with that because what's wrong with conserving water? You say, again, if you've listened to the show, if you continue to listen to the show, you get the idea that I got no problem with conserving water. I have no problem with courts. I have no problem with police. I just have a problem with the way they're funded or the mechanism they're using by initiating violence on people or initiating force on them. I'm diametrically opposed to coercion is the bottom line there.
So would you say, Tom, that if you were in California, that you as a conscientious and a realist citizen would naturally want to conserve water on your own?
I would, because I like to keep my water bill low.
Okay.
And I'm just, I don't know. I guess it's part of my family's culture or something. I guess I just would describe myself as really not much of a waster. I try not to waste. I don't know why. I never got excited about doing that. But obviously it's a good thing. But again, it's the way you go about it. And, remember back earlier, the big question is, should man dominate or master his environment to make his life more convenient and enjoyable, blah, blah, blah? Keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this. So Jerry Brown comes out and says this, and then the former, I think she was the HPCO, she was the HP muckety muck, Carly Fiorina, and she's a likely presidential candidate, or at least she's talked about in that light. That she kind of stepped in it, and of course she got, chastised for saying what she said. But what she said was right. So this is how we talk about this so many times that things are so screwed up. It's hard to jump in the middle because both sides are screwed up. And how do you straighten it out? I would argue, well, you get rid of the whole system because the system has perverse incentives. Thank you, Tanya. And that's the only way you can do it. You cannot reform the system. But again, that's a broader question of where we are. So the big question, think about that. We're going to take it on from the perspective of the freedom advocate, which would be me here for sure. The question that I pose is man intended, in fact, to master his environment, to make his life enjoyable, convenient, all those adjectives, I guess. Or, and you got to be careful about this one, is man here to use the resources or to preserve, the planet in the condition essentially that predated man? In other words, leave it essentially untouched. And one of the things I wanted to bring on, and I guess I'm doing it a little out of order what I had it is, people say, well, hey, dope, there's a middle ground. We don't have to preserve the planet from the way it was on day zero, I guess, or, you could do it some point in between day zero and today. But that presents another problem, and, it's broadly known as a continuum problem. Okay, what date do we preserve it to? 1910, 1800, the year zero, 500 BC? So we get to fight over this for infinitely, right? Because how are we ever going to decide what's the right date? And how are we going to determine exactly what the condition of the world was on that date? So you got a whole giant can of worms if you say, no, there's a compromise position. Yeah, great. Where is it? And I have a lot more to say about this later, but I want to get on with this. So in part, we take on this topic tonight as so many believe that not only that a free society or free market cannot solve the environmental issue, but is in fact is the cause of the environmental disaster. And I don't know if disaster is the right word. The climate change guys who believe global warming's happening and it's accelerating and we're past the point of no return. Well, then it is a total disaster, right? To the people who don't support that's the case, well, we're not in disaster mode yet, but we certainly could have done better. So we want to, discover that a little bit. What would the role of a free society? And some people are also going to argue, well, we've had a free society, and I'm going to argue we clearly haven't for, well, maybe really ever. There have been pockets of it. It operates in the free market whenever we do have a free market, but so many markets today are hampered, and that's another long story. Now, the same people who claim that the free market can't possibly do it because it's the cause of the problem are the ones that say that the state is maybe not only the only mechanism, but however, for sure the best mechanism suited to address or fix the environmental calamity or disaster, right? That the under-regulated, in their view, of course, market has brought upon us. So not only do they see that the free market caused the problem, they think they should actually initiate violence against people in order to fix the problem. So what I'm really trying to bring out is they're wrong on both ends. Okay, and again, I know it sounds maybe wacky to some people, but again, let us develop the context here, and maybe we can get you to come around. And again, if you're diametrically opposed to this, there's probably, in this 1 hour of the show, I'm not going to convince you, but I'm hoping, again, we just get you to think a little bit. So, I would actually, my broad assertion is that, you can't initiate violence to fix a problem. That just makes things worse. I don't care what the problem is, right? And I also would assert that the free market is in fact not the cause of the environmental problem, but it actually naturally limits any environmental damage to its practical minimum. Notice I didn't say there would be none, because I know that me breathing right now, CO2 comes out, and isn't CO2 one of the greenhouse gases? Right? So I guess the only way for me to say none is I got to kill myself, but if I kill myself, I'm still going to, rot in the ground or whatever, and I'm still going to
give
be
off methane
gas, right? Yep. It gets to be a crazy notion. There can't be none. I mean, that's completely not practical in my view, and in my understanding of a free society and the philosophy of it. The other thing is the wealth that's created by the free market, which, we've largely know that the free market is the largest wealth creator. Well, that wealth, in fact, can be used to, fix, if that's the right word, the environmental disaster that's upon us. I mean, if you got stuff messed up, how are you going to do it when you have no resources to do it? I think you're in a much better position to do it. It doesn't mean you will, in fact, clean it up. It means that you at least have the capacity to do it, which I think is a better situation than saying, hey, we simply don't have the capacity to do it. So that's an interesting thing. And so I'm going to move on, and I'm going to, I guess, be a bit provocative here after kind of laying a little bit of that foundation here. There's a Wall Street Journal article. It was, I guess, the Saturday essay, and I think it was a month or so ago. And you'll some people will cringe at this title. Fossil fuels will save the world, in parentheses, really. And that was authored by Matt Ridley and released on March 13th. And again, you can find it at Wall Street Journal. I'll post it here after the show as well. There are problems with oil and gas and coal, but their benefits for people and the planet are beyond dispute. That's the second subtitle, I guess, to the article. And I'm just going to, steal some stuff out of the article to go through it quickly. Again, the whole article will become available to you, but just some of the, I guess I'll call them the highlights. He says, this is me. Consider for a moment the conveniences that are available today that were not available 100 or 200 years ago or whenever, such as, and again, I'm hitting on the water thing because of what's coming up here, the availability of water for drinking, laundry, irrigation, right? Think about transportation without fossil fuels, manufacturing, and all the wealth that comes, associated with that, and the productivity gains that came because of automation, which came from energy production from fossil fuels, right? And those productivity gains got people to be wealthy enough where they could spend time away from attempting to be directly productive. They could study, learn, and develop technologies that then affect, tourism, agriculture, medicine, and all the other stuff that most people don't directly associate with, energy use and, fossil fuels. So I'm saying there's a giant ripple effect of mankind learning how to harness fossil fuels and create all kinds of energy that wasn't available before then, whatever. So I don't want to fight over the date, right? And I just, this is not a proof of anything, but I just want to, hey, there's a lot of self-proclaimed environmentalists that would not have no idea or nor be capable of surviving in a world without those conveniences. My favorites are the protesters who got the signs that are printed by some kind of a printer, a sophisticated machine, right? The stick that's holding up the sign has been what's the word? Not mined. Manufactured or harvested, from the forest, which uses big machinery and transportation, all that stuff, roads, blah, 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 right? It seems a little hypocritical to do so, right? And basically you're protesting against advancements in technology using advancements in technology. And I realize that's not the greatest advancement in technology, a billboard sign. But nonetheless, it's all interconnected into the economy. So you are using something that you're claiming, I don't know, maybe shouldn't be used, right? Or it shouldn't be available because we shouldn't be doing this. Or, I guess your stick for your sign should be all hand hewn. You got to walk into the woods and chop it down with, I don't know, what did the Indians use? A rock that was, what do they call that? Like an arrowhead or something?
Homemade hatchet.
Yeah, homemade hatchet, right? You can't use manufacturing because you can't use fossil fuels, all that stuff. So anyway, right, think about this. So now I'm going to go to quoting some of the story. He says, the result of this great boost in energy is what the economic historian and philosopher Deirdre McCloskey calls the great enrichment. In the case of the U.S., there has been a roughly 9,000% increase in the value of goods and services available to the average American since 1800. Almost all of which are made of, powered by, or propelled by fossil fuels. I'd been into many a discussion with people sitting in an office about, environmentalism and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, everybody drove a car here, even if it's a electric car recharged by solar panels. The car was manufactured likely using fossil fuels, etc., right? The road that they drove, all this stuff, right? Anyway, still more than 1 billion people on the planet have yet to get access to electricity and to experience the leap in living standards that abundant energy brings. This is not just an inconvenience for them. Indoor air pollution from wood fires kills 4 million people a year. I assume that's mostly in Africa. The next time that somebody at a rally against fossil fuels lectures you about her concern for the fate of her grandchildren, show her a picture of an African child dying today from inhaling the dense muck of a smoky fire. I think they actually burn dung a lot, but I'm no scientist or great. I don't have any great knowledge here, but I think I heard that. The article was, notice too the ways in which fossil fuels have contributed to preserving the planet. Okay, this is where people are already having trouble. Wait, no, fossil fuels is the bad thing. They're not preserving the planet, but hear me out. As the American author and fossil fuels advocate Alex Epstein points out in a bravely unfashionable book, which is certainly true, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels is the title, the use of coal halted and then reversed the deforestation of Europe and North America. Right? Again, all these things are interconnected, and you know, people just find something they don't like about something and they condemn it. Well, what's our alternatives? If the alternatives are worse, I guess you're stuck there. I mean, I'd love to live in the Jetsons world. I mean, he seemed to, what was his name? George Jetson. He seemed to have a pretty decent life other than some frustrations with his wife and his kid and his dog, right?
I think his boss was the most.
Mr. Spacely.
Yeah.
He was a pain in the...
And Cogswell Cogs.
Yeah, Mr. Cogswell, right? But, so people have this, I don't know, glamorized version of how things should be. Great. How are you going to do it? Right? There's limitations at the moment of technology. Well, there will always be limitations of technology, but you have to live in reality and not to say, well, you know what, here's the deal. We should absolutely do nothing until we have the perfect solution. That's not the way things typically happen, right? Things are typically, science and technology are evolutionary typically, not revolutionary. Now, I know things do come that are revolutionary, but by and large, it's evolutionary. Where in the heck is I know? Yeah, okay. The turn to oil halted the slaughter of the world's whales and seals for their blubber, right? And I think there's some Eskimo tribes that still do that, and they do it out of I don't know, I guess tradition or whatever the world is, right? But and I think some cultures still do it. The Japanese culture is still big on hunting whales generally, and I know there's been restrictions and all that stuff, but right, it's part of their culture. Think about fertilizer manufactured with gas halve the amount of land needed to produce a given amount of food, thus feeding a growing population while sparing land for wild nature. And again, I'm not going to argue that fertilizer is the perfect thing to use either, or at least chemical fertilizers, right? But here's a quote from the article which I have trouble. We should encourage the switch from coal to gas in the generation of electricity, provide incentives for energy efficiency, get nuclear power back on track, and keep developing solar power and electricity storage. We should also invest in research on ways to absorb carbon dioxide from the air by fertilizing the ocean or fixing it through carbon capture and storage. Those measures all make sense, and there is every reason to promote open-ended research to find some unexpected new energy technology. I have trouble with the word we, for starters. Usually when people say we should do this, it really means we should do it collectively, right? We should use collectivism. In other words, we should collect taxes or we should levy new taxes so we, quote unquote, can do this. And again, that's contrary to the free market. I think, you cannot gain the efficiencies that you get out of the free market by doing things in that way. And again, that's a whole nother discussion about the free market. And again, stick with us on the show and we'll get there. We can't go into detail on everything. It's just too time consuming for an episode. He says the one thing that will not work is the one thing that the environmental movement insists upon: subsidizing wealthy crony capitalists to build low-density, low-output, capital-intensive, land-hungry renewable energy schemes while telling the poor to give up the dream of getting richer through fossil fuels. And again, the basic libertarian argument is the people you're actually hurting the worst are the ones nearer the bottom of the rung, the poor, basically, right? If you have this modern convenience available, but out of policy, you try to reduce it or keep it out of their hands, you're hurting them more because a wealthy person can pay for higher costing alternatives, where the poor basically don't have those alternatives. And again, people don't think about that. With that, I want to move on to the next article, but do you guys have anything to add to that, to criticize or critique or anything with that, or are we good? Are we all good with fossil fuels?
We're all good. I like them.
The smell of petroleum in the morning.
Yep.
I think one of the things that I heard that, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but in the grow local, the grow local
movement
approach,
yep,
strikes me as a rational approach. It just would seem to make sense that you're using local resources. It's staying in the local community. I've learned the impact of the small local economy, Tom, living where we live, and all that. And so one of the things that I've heard years ago that was very striking to me is that it takes, I don't know how many times, I should know this if I'm going to blabber about it, but to move a head of lettuce that's grown in California to Indiana or Wisconsin or Illinois.
Right.
It takes far more caloric value in BTUs in the gas and diesel and gathering of that, and everything else, than that particular head of lettuce ever has for us to consume.
Yeah, the construction of the road, the maintenance of the road.
All that.
And by the way, all the roads are subsidized. That's why you do have more of this transcontinental transport by truck. It's than you would normally. Again, that's a big topic, but interesting, no doubt.
And I, as you know, you guys cornered me some time ago on sort of my environmentally minded practices and wishes and so forth. But I think I do see hypocrisy everywhere. Many of the points that you pointed out are very hypocritical of one another. But at the same time, I think if you look at current practices of recycling and so forth and so on, you can blow holes in them all the time, and in the end, it kind of makes us, even me, who's a big proponent of them and have wishes that things stay good in our world, I think they're full of holes and full of contradictions.
Yes, because of the way, the method, the strategy they choose to go about it.
Yes.
That's the problem. I think there's fairly little argument. There's always some, there's no doubt, but that people would want a cleaner environment rather than a dirtier one. The question is,
I think most people would unanimously say, yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's not too hard of a sell, but I think then the dirtiness gets into, well, how are we going to do it, right? And there's who's going to bear the cost, and ultimately, I would argue the consumer has to bear the cost, because we're going to get into the paper versus plastic here thing in a minute.
Is this an appropriate time to talk about China and how China has had such horrible pollution?
Yeah.
And now they are, again, on their own because it's making people sick and everything else. They're going, well, wow, if we want to continue to grow the economic inertia and make this a good place for our people and prosper, we got to clean up.
Absolutely. And the way to do it is now they've created some wealth, theoretically, if they haven't consumed it all, right? They have some wealth, and they're in a better position today than they were before to clean it up. Now you could argue, well, they're in a worse position today because they got more environmental problems today than they had, 100 years ago when they were largely unautomated. But that's, would I like everyone to understand these things and not create the mess in the first place? Sure, I'd like to. The point is, I'm not willing to force them to do it that way because they won't ultimately learn the lesson that they will this way. And I know that other people say, well, in the meantime, we all suffer the consequences because China made the planet dirtier, and I get, asthma because the air's blowing from China over to here. And that's part of what's you can't disconnect yourself from society, right? I mean, I would like the people of the world to understand political philosophy a whole lot better. But I'm not willing to force them to do it. What I'm trying to do is persuade them, and I got this little thing called the Annoying Peasant Radio Show that I'm trying to get people to understand it and go, hey, actually, that is a better way. Peaceful way, rather than creating conflict, sounds like it long-term is more sustainable. It's more environmentally friendly. We don't have wars, right? You eliminate the conflicts. Don't have wars. Don't put up buildings that are environmentally damaging and then blow them up and then build them back up again. Doesn't seem to make sense, other than just that discounting killing people and all the other stuff that goes with it, right? So peace is the way to do it, and that's, again, what we're advocating here. I'm going to move on to the drought climate change situation in California, and I'm not seeing my whole picture here on my docket, so I can't remember if I got this later, but if I do, I'm going out of order again. But, okay, so Carly Fiorina says the drought situation, not the lack of rain, but what happened afterwards, that we're in short supply of drinking water, that responsibility lies on the state for having this shortage. And really, this is where the hubbub with her making this speech, again, a likely presidential candidate, she said this, that it's state. Well, and people say, well, it's not the state. It's the dirty businesses that created the pollution, that created climate change, which is what we're suffering from now. Well, even if that were true, even if it were, if the state of California had built more, since at the moment they're in charge of these public goods, and I'm using public in quotes, why did the state of California not, as the population grew, as the climatologists that they so much love and adore and respect their opinion, when they're saying, hey, we're heading into a drought, it's getting worse, blah, 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 you're getting more population, people are consuming more water because of the industry and things they're creating wealth with, right? Why didn't they build more reservoirs? Why didn't they invest in infrastructure to transport water via canals or whatever? Why didn't they invest more money in desalination or other alternatives that I don't even know of, right? These are their leaders, the people in the know, the people who are in charge of policy. They're the ones who didn't do it. And I'm saying, since given that's the situation, she's actually right. Now, she was chastised and she was crazy about that. Well, you got to look out for the environment. Well, that's great. You know what? So the bottom line is the snail darter is real healthy because they took down like 4 dams, so the snail darter could be healthy. But now there's no drinking water reserves, and they're looking at creating a greater environmental disaster because you're going to have to maybe at some point do something drastic. Are you going to have to build a whole new canal that's coming from Lake Michigan? I don't know, right? Or some crazy infrastructure projects. You're going to have to temporarily truck it. You're going to have to pump it from other places, right? How are you going to pump it? That takes energy, right? All these things. If they knew this, if they're our leaders and they're supposed to take care of us, I'm saying they're doing a horrible job, right? But so let me go to an article from Reason.com. It was entitled "Tapping Water Markets in California," and slowly we're going to get to what I think is the crux of the issue. Drought may force the unthinkable, he says, resorting to property rights and markets. And again, I got the link here, and I'll post it on the Facebook page for Annoying Peasant Radio again. Make no mistake, the drought in California is severe. The current shortfall in precipitation has now lasted 4 years. The snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains that supplies most of California's surface water is just 5% of the April 1 average. So they have 1/20th of the snowpack that they normally have, or that an average year would present, right? That's low. As an emergency response to the drought, Democratic Governor Jerry Brown has ordered the State Water Control Board to impose restrictions to achieve a 25% reduction in potable urban water usage through February 28th, 2016. Brown has empowered the board to bring enforcement actions against illegal diverters and those engaging in wasteful and unreasonable use of water. Water wasters in some cities could be fined up to $500 for breaking the rules. The executive director of PERC, I'll explain that in a second, his name is Watson. He says, too little, too late. A predictable byproduct of 20 years of water mismanagement. Well, who was charged with water management? In this case, the state of California and all the minions that, represent them are agents of the state, right? A drought does not necessarily entail a water shortage. Think about it, right? If you have enough reservoirs, you still have water. But people automatically associate drought with, shortage of water. Yes, you got a shortage of water revenue, if you let me use that word, but as long as you have your assets in water built up enough, you're okay. Droughts are caused by nature. Shortages exist when demand exceeds supply, and markets are preventing from, here we're getting to the crux of my whole deal for the day. Markets are prevented from allocating a resource to its highest value use, usually because the price of the resource is held artificially low. So trades like the proposed water sales from farmers to Los Angeles can help alleviate water shortages in drinking, hygienic, pool, and lawn sprinkling water don't exist. Those trades don't happen, right? Because the state is in charge of it and its minions. Unfortunately, California has failed to develop institutions to handle water scarcity other than political allocation. Consequently, such trades are very hard to pull off. So what to do? Right now, lots of water in California is stuck in low-value uses because the bureaucratic transactions costs to arranging water transfers are so high. In other words, basically this stuff is stuck in political wrangling, right? PERC, this organization I alluded to earlier, is short for Property Environment Research Center, which is, I believe, in Bozeman, Montana. PERC's longer-term vision would involve wiping the state clean of water subsidies, right? Artificially low prices. So people say, well, it only costs a few cents. Who cares? If it gets wasted, it's not a big deal, right? Prices say something, and I'll get to that more in greater detail here in a second. But would involve wiping the state clean of water subsidies and encouraging every interested party to participate in water markets. Watson believes that environmentalists will eventually come to understand that they can compete in water markets too, and that they would be better able to achieve their conservation goals that way than through the political process. Some examples already exist in the state, such as the Scott River Trust in Northern California, which leases water from farmers to enhance salmon spawning habitat. There are other examples. This is, again, not in the article here. This is me again. Of environmentalists, I would argue, maybe they didn't think about it. I don't know what went through their mind. The Ducks Unlimited. There's a number of organizations. I can't even think of them all, and I'm not big on hunting, so I don't know them all. But what they did is they said, hey, our resource is going away, right? I don't know. Everybody's shooting the ducks. There's not going to be any ducks. So they got voluntary contributions to purchase land so that they could protect the population of ducks. Okay? What I'm saying is examples already exist of environmental groups going out and doing this non-coercively. They could do the same thing with water, or a similar thing, an analogous thing with water, right? So there's already examples that exist here. That how water could be potentially handled. And again, I think the root of the problem here, well, a couple roots, is the state being involved in this and artificially, they're regulating and allocating water by political means, not by their highest value use. Well, you can't know their highest value use because you haven't allowed the price of water to be in a free market. In other words, its true value comes out depending on what people are willing to pay for it. And when you don't allow that, now we don't actually know what the true value of drinking water is. So I think that's another mistake, and obviously there's many of them. But I'm going to go to an article from the Mises Institute, which you can find at Mises.org. Again, I will post the link on the Facebook page. But this one's authored by Ryan McMakin. It's entitled Drought and the Failure of Big Government in California. It was dated April 10th of this year. I'll just take some of it. California Governor Jerry Brown has announced that private citizens and small businesses, among others, will have their water usage restricted, monitored, and subject to heavy fines if state agents determine that too much water has been used. Noticeably absent from the list of those subject to restrictions, are the largest users of water, the farmers. The fact that growers who remain a powerful interest group in California happen to be exempt from water restrictions remind us that water is not allocated according to any functional market system, but is allocated through political means by politicians and government agents. Do we actually think that's the most effective way to allocate a resource? Right? It seems crazy. When pressed as to why the farmers got a free pass, listen to this, Jerry Brown was quick to fall back on the old standbys. California farms are important to the economy, and California farms produce a lot of food. That's also true. Thus, the rules don't apply to them? If translated from political speak, however, what Brown really said was this: I have unilaterally decided that agriculture is more important than other industries, and consumers in California, including industries and households that may use water much more efficiently and which may be willing to pay more for the water. Right? Growers pay, we'll get into just a few of the little dirty details. Growers pay a little less than half as much as city users are paying for water. Now, realize growers are not paying, they call it non-potable water versus potable water, drinking water, essentially. So there would be some additional cost that the city users would have to incur, right? Because it's, more purified for layman's terms. But listen to this. Historically, however, the gap between city prices and agricultural prices is much, much greater. Bloomberg notes that as of 2014, the price of water had risen to $1,100 from about $140 a year ago in the Fresno area. Going back further, we find that in 2001, many farmers were paying $70 per acre foot. That means basically an acre of water a foot deep. Prices well below $1,000 are far more typical of the past several decades than the $1,000 to $3,000 per acre foot many growers now say they pay. In fact, if we see what the per gallon price would be for a $140 acre foot of water, we find that a city dweller could use 50 gallons per day at a monthly price of 64 cents per month, or a per gallon price of 0.04 cents. Right? So the bottom line is, this is being misallocated because of price. And yes, recently the prices are going up to growers, but only because a drought is so severe now. Again, I can't remember the other fellow's name. Too little, too late, right? The marketplace, if it was a free market, would have responded much more quickly. And when the prices are low, that signals to you that a resource is abundant. When the price is high, it means that the supply and demand are out of whack. Either the supply is very low, the demand is very high, or both, right? It's possible that that's a combination. In many cases, here's an interesting one, and I've kind of alluded to this. The low prices are enabled by decades of taxpayer subsidization of water infrastructure. Easy for me to say. A year-round flow of water to both cities and growers is ensured in part by huge New Deal-era projects like Shasta Dam and Hoover Dam, which the state of California could not afford to build, but which today California largely relies on for water care of the U.S. taxpayer. So what is he really saying? Hey, California would have never built that dam, but they took money from people from Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, other places, right, to make their lives better. So people in other states have subsidized water in the state of California. I'm sure there's many more examples than just those couple dams. In central and northern California, the primary beneficiaries of federal water projects are growers, although it's the city dwellers who use a relatively small amount of water who get lectured about conserving water. Where an actual market in water allowed, however, growers would have to compete for water with city dwellers, whose industries are far more productive than agricultural enterprises and who are likely to be willing to pay higher prices. Even when the private sector owners of water are old farming families, a legacy of prior appropriation, the water would still tend to go to those who value it the most, as reflected in the per unit prices they are willing to pay. That is essentially city dwellers. The fact remains that California farmland is in a desert where it rains under 12 inches per year. Massive irrigation projects have made farming economical in the region, but it's unlikely that the status quo can continue forever if California dries up and cities begin to compete for more water. But think of this. Well, actually, I'm gonna do one more paragraph here because this is and then I'm gonna expand on this. When crops like pecans, which are native to where? Do you guys know where pecans are native to? Hands on buzzers.
I think the
Brazil?
South.
Louisiana. The South was the correct answer. Brad wins. He's got the first star of the day.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Right? Louisiana, where it rains over 50 inches per year, are being grown in Central California. We have to ask ourselves if there is true comparative advantage at work here, or if the industry is really sitting upon a shaky foundation of government-subsidized and allocated resources. Maybe the environmentalists should be arguing, what in the hell are we growing pecans for in a desert? Right? To preserve the environment, shouldn't you just grow the pecans back in Louisiana? Right? Then you wouldn't have this huge demand for water in the first place. Okay? But the problem is you've now built up this infrastructure and there's people who rely on that, and you're going to cause a massive disturbance if you try to bring this back. And I'm not suggesting you don't do that, but I'm just saying there's going to be pain. When you screw up, there's going to be pain to try to bring it back to where it should have been in the first place. And again, it may only have become viable to grow pecans in the Central Valley in California because the price of water was subsidized. Right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, if it wasn't subsidized, it may have been. Again, I'm not saying I know this. I'm just saying it's certainly cheaper than it otherwise would have been. And maybe there wouldn't have been such a draw to move the pecan growing to the Central Valley of California in the first place. right? In other words, these distortions that the state creates affect you in so many different ways that it's hard to bring it all in here in one show, one episode, to fully understand what is going on. But the rhetoric that's coming out of the growers, of course, is that California growers are essential to the American food supply. Some will even suggest that it's a national security issue, and I've heard that before. Without California growers, we're told we'll all starve in case of foreign embargo, right? But let's not kid ourselves. North America is in approximately zero danger of having too little farmland for staple crops. In fact, one can argue that some of the best farmland in the world, where? Hands on buzzers. Where do you think some of the best farmland in the world is?
The Midwest.
Yes. More specific, please.
Iowa.
Ding, ding, ding. Trigger wins. Iowa. And I would have got that because I've driven through Iowa numerous times, and that soil is black and rich as I've never seen before.
You pointed that out on our trip.
Yes, I did. Road trip. In Iowa, for instance, that you can argue that land is underutilized because policies like Jerry Brown's farm favoritism, right, the water and all the things, send the message that California will prop up its desert agriculture no matter what. Right? In other words, the growers in Iowa go, we don't really want to compete with those guys because even if we do one-up them, Jerry Brown and those guys out there are going to further subsidize agriculture, and they're going to be able to outcompete us again just because of the subsidies and the shenanigans that are going on, not because they have a real comparative advantage. So now you're underutilizing the soil and the capacity in Iowa. So I thought that was an interesting point to add. All right. With that, I'd like to move on with Waller Block, or did I miss something or not emphasize something properly in the previous part? Are you guys good?
I'm good.
Okay, we're cool. Here's kind of the main feature of the evening, Walter Block. And I think he may be the preeminent scholar on free market environmentalism. I think there's like 3 YouTubes. They're just lectures that he gave. They're very interesting. He makes fantastic points. And I know we're running long in the tooth here, so I'll try to shoot through them quick. I'll make, again, those links available on the Facebook page so you could take your time and watch them yourself and get the full context, which obviously I cannot reproduce here in this short time. But let me just give some of his points from a number of his presentations. He says, free markets and environmentalism are not polar opposites. Okay, that's the point where that guy laughs, right? He falls off his chair laughing. Adherence to property rights present the best alternative to preserving and improving the environmental conditions. Property rights. We might have talked about that before on this show. Listen to this. Polluters is one of the things he talked about. He says, state courts used the public good argument, which allowed polluters to violate property rights. Why? Because they wanted to improve the economy and promote the U.S. as the number one, the superpower. So when polluters were polluting and people complained, citizens complained and brought suits, they were largely dismissed or defeated because the state basically wanted to encourage manufacturing, right? They wanted to encourage us. So they said, well, we're not going to hamper our manufacturing capacity by allowing some of these, they used to call them nuisance suits, to come through. So what happened? They actually encouraged them to continue to pollute and maybe to pollute worse, because eventually it becomes known that, hey, the court's actually not going to crack down on us. Why would we spend money to, scrub our, smokestacks, right, to reduce the pollutants coming out of there? Because if I do it, and Trigger is a competitor of mine and he doesn't, he's now going to have a competitive advantage because his costs are lower. So ultimately what could happen is I go out of business who tried to do it, right? And he who didn't, he excels and he gets more profit.
Yes.
Right? So under the circumstance where the state is really going to give us the green light to pollute, essentially I'm committing economic suicide to try to clean up my act. Now, I realize one of the ways I can help myself is through PR, right? I could say, hey, that Trigger dude, he makes his stuff real dirty. I make it, and I'm not a polluter. Buy from me if you support, So I can alleviate that to some degree, certainly. And if I have the most fantastic PR firm in the world, maybe I can completely overcome what he's doing. But I'm saying I'm at an economic disadvantage. I got to pay the PR firm too, by the way.
Which would be who?
That'd be Nick. I'd hire Nick to do it. So think about that a little bit, from the polluter standpoint. Polluters did not have the incentive to protect the environment as they effectively got the green light to pollute. And apparently this is like the 1870s to 1910, according to Walter Block. And people say, well, that's a long time ago. Well, it certainly is, and things have changed. I'm not arguing that. But I'm saying when you start setting this precedent, it gets difficult to break these things. And, how many times have you heard legal cases going what you would think is a goofy way, and the judge says, well, I had to rule on legal precedent. Well, there's the danger, that happens. And again, I'm not saying that happens in every case here anymore, and then maybe not directly affects but a few cases. But again, it made things worse. Check this out. He says Georgia Supreme Court actually had a ruling stating that essentially polluting is unavoidable and okay. I mean, what do you think is going to happen to the rate of pollution?
Go right through the roof.
Absolutely, right? You just gave him the green light, and then that was the state of Georgia. Think about this. He was talking about, well, let's say obviously your car, internal combustion engine, automobile pollutes as you operate it, right? If you had a problem with this, and most people do, but if you had to the extent where you want to file a lawsuit, what are you going to do? File a lawsuit against every automobile owner / operator, right? You'd have to file a lawsuit. And the contribution, the point is, of each one of those automobiles is infinitesimal, right? It's a very small amount. So what are you going to do? Sue one guy, whatever. It costs you $1 million to do the suit, and you're going to win $7 from him because that's his contribution to pollution from his automobile. So that suit never gets brought, is the point. Well, think about this in a second. That's today's society. This is interesting. Block says, well, wait a minute. So you could have, what if roads were privately owned? Now I go and I'm going to go sue a larger private road owner and say, hey, you allow cars on your property that pollute. So now it might become economically viable for me to sue that guy, right?
Yeah.
And even if the threat of the suit is there, that guy might turn around and say, hey, wait, here's the deal. People who drive on my road that I customers of mine, essentially, if you drive without, I don't know, a catalytic converter, I'm going to charge you more than I'm going to charge a guy who has a fully functioning modern catalytic converter. Again, assuming a catalytic converter does what people say it should do, right? So he would charge accordingly, but he would also become a target for an environmental lawsuit, so it could actually happen. So now what might he do? Hey, this is too great of a risk. No cars without catalytic converters, or no cars without these certain standards, right? So road owners might be also pushing for better standards of environmental performance, right? So again, there'd be mechanisms in place that might help the environmental performance. And I'm not saying it absolutely will. I don't know how it would turn out. But I'm saying there's clearly a better target there for recourse than there is today. So you certainly have a better chance of having better environmental performance. And I don't want to go through all these things, but one of the things he talked about that I think is interesting before we get on to paper versus plastic, because that's got to be the highlight of the show, species extinction. Publicly owned, when I say publicly owned animals, I'm saying like in national parks and public lands and stuff like that, right? I don't know, elephants, rhinos, fish, and obviously not land, but lakes, ponds, streams, etc. Buffalo, things like that, right? They face the tragedy of the commons, and I'll explain that in a second. But versus those types of animals have faced extinction, right? But not too many cows really have faced extinction, right? Things like that. Pigs, chickens. I'm trying to, think of the animals that have a high value use. right? Because they've become privately owned versus publicly held. What's the real difference there? Trigger's got, I can see he's watches. So I'll let Trigger go on this one. What's really the difference between a cow and a buffalo?
A cow and a buffalo is, well, the way he explains it is, you can own a cow, you can't own a buffalo. So if you see a buffalo running and you look at your cow, all right, and how does he explain it? You can just shoot the buffalo. I can shoot the buffalo, or Tom can shoot the buffalo.
Yes, we both have
who's
license
gonna shoot?
to do it.
Yeah. So he said, since they made it, you can't privately own it. The government is the one that drove the buffalo into extinction.
Yeah, the incentive is to take as many as you possibly can, because you don't own the herd of buffalo.
Yes.
Right? And you say, well, the government owns the herd of buffalo, so they have the incentive to take care of it. Well, no, they don't, because those people are all temporary office holders. They don't actually have ownership in the asset value of the public stuff in the country, right? Which is completely different from a farmer. Why doesn't he just go out and kill all his cattle and be done with it?
Because he gets something from them.
Yeah, he's broke if he does that.
Yeah.
Right?
Like he said, a cow or a farmer doesn't keep one, or only keeps one bull and all the heifers because he wants more cows.
Right. He wants to improve the asset value of the herd.
And you don't shoot your cow because why? The cow will eventually, if it's a female, give you more calves, more cows, and milk and other things.
Right.
The buffalo, you just see it over there. Well, if I don't shoot it, Tom's going to shoot it. Well, I might as well shoot it then.
Exactly. And everybody has that same attitude. What happens to all the buffalo?
No, they're gone.
Goners. Right.
And that was thanks to what? The government.
No, the movie Dances with Wolves. No, I'm just joking there. But that's very interesting. Think about who holds the asset value in these things. Think about all the things that have either gone extinct or near extinction.
That's like he was saying about Botswana. They have one of the largest privatized elephant herds that can be privately owned. And Botswana has no problem even elephants being close to extinction or shot or poached or anything. Every other country in Africa has a problem with it.
Right. Again, where's the incentives? Think about the incentives. That's what's the most important thing here. Again, people think, well, wait a minute, I have an example of a farmer who had a herd of cattle and he killed them all, or he didn't take care of them properly and they all died. People misunderstand here. I'm not saying every farmer is perfect, right? There will be farmers of, lesser means, lesser skills, lesser understanding of his herd, right? Those things can happen. The point is it will happen less under a system in which he has the incentive to preserve the herd versus no incentive to preserve the herd.
Yes.
Right? That's the difference. And again, people argue, well, it's not perfect, so it doesn't, won't work. So I think that's an important thing. And that was a thing. Oh, shoot. I was going to play this paper versus plastic audio cut, and Brad can't hear this, and I can't remember how long I go. It go like 3 minutes here. This is Walter Block, because I think this hits home for almost everybody rather than the buffalo, because not so many people have hunted buffalo directly, right? But listen to this. Brad, you won't be able to hear this. I'll break in as soon as I'm done. It's about 3 minutes or so. Here's Walter Block talking about the paper versus plastic controversy. Here we go, Walter Block.
And doesn't undermine it. Let me take the plastic, paper, recycling, reusing. This is a fetish with these people. I mean, they're crazy about it. At least on U.S. campuses, you got to recycle everything. You have 55 different slots. You put this here and that there. Let's suppose that plastic is horrible as our friends on the left and the environmental movement think it is. It's noxious. It's a poison. It's just very bad. Whereas paper is great. Paper bags are great because they're biodegradable, and you put them in the earth and they transform into earth in a couple of years. And I'm going to put you through two scenarios. The first one is you're at the supermarket checkout counter, and they've rung up your groceries, and they ask you this inevitable, fateful question: paper or plastic? Now, in most places, or it used to be in groceries, they wouldn't explicitly charge you for it. Any more than they would charge you for the lighting or for the cleaning the hallways or anything like that. But let's suppose that they charged you a penny each. Do you now have any incentive to eschew the evil plastic and embrace the good paper? No, because it's a penny versus a penny. But there are more costs to paper and plastic bags than the cost of production. There's also the cost of disposal. Well, in most cases, you're not led as if by Adam Smith's invisible hand to do the right thing either, namely not use the plastic and use the paper, because they've municipalized or nationalized the garbage dumps. And you usually pay for garbage removal through taxes, so it doesn't matter. But that's the problem. Suppose now that we privatized garbage dumps, we privatized waste disposal areas. And let's suppose, again, that paper is good and plastic is bad. If you own a garbage dump, would you allow plastic in your garbage dump, even though if you had plastic there, you couldn't use it for farming because it would be poisonous, you couldn't build on it because it would be poisonous? Would you allow it? At the right price? Yeah. So let's suppose that the harm done by the environment to the environment or to your private property is $5 per plastic bag. What will the market price of disposing of a plastic bag be? It'll probably be $5, because if it was more, someone would undercut it, and if it was less, the people would lose money. Well, now you're back at the supermarket checkout counter, and instead of a penny versus a penny, it's 5.01 versus 2 cents. Yes, it's a penny to buy either of them, but it's $5 to dispose of the plastic for a total of 5.01 versus a penny to dispose of the paper for a grand total of 2 cents. Now the invisible hand is working. Now you're being led to use the good environmental thing, namely paper, and not plastic, because now the market is allowed to work.
Okay, so Dr. Walter Block there was talking about paper versus plastic. I'm recapping this a little bit for Brad because he didn't get to hear this. And the deal is that waste disposal has largely been municipalized. In other words, the junk, the garbage going into the dump has been largely, and I know things have been changing to some degree more recently, but they charge the same for the disposal of a paper bag versus a plastic bag. If it's actually true that a plastic bag is way worse for the environment than a paper bag, if you were the property or the landfill owner, you wouldn't accept that for the same price. You might accept plastic bags, but you're going to say, hey, you have to pay us, 5 times as much, 10 times as much, whatever the market rate would be, depending on what other people accept, for that same plastic bag versus a paper bag. So the point is, when you go to the grocery store and they say a penny for the plastic bag or a penny for the paper bag, and I know that, again, largely they don't charge you. It's already buried in the cost of the food items that you purchase. But essentially that's the case. You're not paying the cost of disposal of those items because they've been municipalized. They're buried in your tax. And they're subsidizing the true cost of landfilling those items. So again, what he's pointing to is if the free market were allowed to work, the true cost of a plastic bag would be known. It would come out because maybe when they sold you the bag, they'd charge you extra for the bag because of the disposal end if they have something with the landfill, or you would pay it on the other end when you try to get rid of the bag, right? And again, he raised also that I don't think actually in that clip a little later that there's been guys come saying actually the paper is worse because the plastic is inert. It's just in the ground. It stays there. It doesn't do anything.
Garbologist.
A garbologist, yes. A guy who actually
says when the paper decays, it gives off methane gas.
Yes. And
especially the worst is telephone books.
Telephone books, yes. He cited that. But so the point is, and he says, well, wait a minute. So since right now we're doing the example with saying, hey, plastic is worse than paper, so we're assuming that ultimately the cost of plastics would be higher than paper. But here's the cool thing. If it turns out that we're actually wrong and paper is actually worse than plastic, well, that would just be adjusted, right? The marketplace would adjust it and say, whoa, I'm not letting that paper in here for the same price I'm letting the plastic in here. I'm now going to charge you more for the paper because it's actually worse. right? And why would he charge more? Because the owner of the landfill has an interest in the asset value of the landfill. Like, I don't know, he wants to pave it over later and make a playground out of it. He wants to build houses on it. He wants to put a pond on it. He wants to make a ski hill out of it, right? The point is he has asset value, a concern for the asset value, so he's going to protect that property. So if he's going to get a diminished value of the property, right, because he's going to take plastic bags, assuming, again, plastic bags are really terrible, he's going to say, well, okay, that's going to lower the value of my property. Well, I'm going to take the cash now in higher disposal fee, right? So he gets his money regardless. So he's going to protect the property as best he can either way. And, of course, he's going to put the systems in place to protect the property if he takes those bags, and they truly are bad, that when he goes to try to sell the property later, say, hey, but I took all the proper precautions. Go ahead, test the land. It's actually good for this use, a manufacturing facility or whatever is, proposed to go on there. So I think, again, it's a great example of how the free market, voluntary cooperation would actually take care of the environment better than the system we have today. Again, not perfectly, because some people are going to naturally not, their culture is to not take care of things, right? So it doesn't make them be perfect. But the point is, it doesn't systematically incentivize people to do the wrong thing. It actually systematically incentivizes people to do the right thing. It doesn't mean everyone will do it, but they will have the incentive to. So I think that's a very important point, and I think that really ultimately turns into the crux of the whole argument. I want to move to again, I would encourage you to listen to any one or all three of those YouTubes by Walter Block. Of course, he does a much better job of explaining and in greater detail because he has more time to do it than I did here. But I just want to talk about the Exxon Valdez for a short amount of time and use that as another example because he actually did that too, and I think it was a different video, a different lecture. And then I'll go to my conclusions and we'll get out of here. But Exxon, Trigger's leaving us. Yep. He's cutting out early. All right, thanks for joining us, Trigger. We'll talk to you later. So Exxon Valdez had, by the way, at the time that the accident occurred. Again, do I need to explain this, Brad, or does everybody know the Exxon Valdez?
I think we can move that.
Okay,
past that, Tom.
We'll call that a moot point. So did you know this? See, I didn't know all this stuff. The number 3 guy in the hierarchy on the Valdez was actually piloting the ship at the time of the accident?
I knew that there was some controversy about where the captain was.
Ah, very good. See, you're on it. And the question is why? And the captain who was supposedly qualified to handle a ship in the waters in which it was navigating, apparently he was drunk and sleeping it off at the time of the accident. Well, in a sense, are you saying you want a drunk guy who's qualified to run the ship? No, I'm not suggesting that at all. But here's the thing Walter Block raised. He says, would it be in Exxon's, to their advantage to have an alcoholic, a drunk, piloting one of their ships? In other words, there's no way Exxon wins on that deal, right? They probably would have liked to have gotten rid of him. And Walter Block adds, he asserts, he makes the question, were they not able to, or did they not move to, or were they not able to fire or get rid of this guy because of discrimination laws? And you're like, what discrimination laws? Well, we all know that alcoholism is treated as a disease in the workplace, and you can't basically fire a guy for a medical situation, right? And he's not saying that's what happened. He's saying, did it? He's asking the question. Was that part of it? Another one is you raised earlier about incentives, and I think this is very interesting to the Valdez disaster. I'm sorry, did I say incentives? I meant to say liability limits. You talked about liability limits earlier, very early on in the show. Exxon had a lesser incentive to double hull their ships. Why? Because there was a liability limit at the time of the accident. What was the liability limit at the time? According to Walter Block, it was to the value of the ship and its cargo. Right? In other words, add up what that value was. That's a max they could ever pay for an accident. Okay? Well, think about this a sec. Let's say I got a $50 car, and I drive it into your $10 million house, and I was driving my $50 car, still goes pretty fast, so I slammed it in there pretty hard, and I did a whole lot of damage. Think of how crazy that would be. Well, people say, well, I only had a $50 car, and I only had $20 worth of stuff in there, so $70 is all I provide, right? People will go, well, that's insane. There's no way. That's not fair. You created, $1 million worth of damage. You got to do $1 million of reparations. Well, that's not the thing, not the situation that existed in the time of the Exxon Valdez, again, according to Dr. Walter Block. So think about this. They had very reduced, or maybe you could argue little incentive to double hull their ship before the accident, right? Before all this came up. So the question again is, since the state is the one who puts the limits on the liabilities, is the underlying cause, did the state put incentives in there to make this more dangerous than it needed to be? Okay, and just about the one that I happen to know off the top of my head or understand slightly is, there's all kinds of restrictions on where oil firms can drill, right? They're trying to get them away from populated areas, et cetera, or environmentally sensitive areas, et cetera. But what happens ultimately is they get pushed into the ocean, into deeper and deeper waters, right? Because they can't drill in shallow waters because of whatever, tourism and all the other excuses or arguments that are made. Well, does that have some underlying effect on what happened to BP in the Gulf? In other words, should they really not have been drilling there in the first place, but their locations become more and more limited because of environmental restrictions, right? So the point that Dr. Block raises, does the state have some underlying root culpability here in all these cases? Oh, one last thing I should have added when I was doing the Valdez. Suits, by the way, by fishermen for damages, right? Because they couldn't fish, or there weren't any fish, or whatever the exact specification was. They'd been dismissed by the courts. Why? On the basis that they don't have standing because they don't actually own the fish. So now you can't have recourse because you don't own the fish. Again, if oceans were privately held, if the animals, some of the animals, a certain species, I don't know how you could divvy it up, but I assume the market could work it out eventually and make it work, right? If they could be privately owned, and then you would have recourse. So do you favor a system that has no recourse over a system that does have recourse? I think it doesn't matter too much to people when they're not involved, but if it's your property or it's your livelihood at stake, I got a feeling you might have a different position, right? And that's what we're pointing to, privately held, things that are held in public are victims of the tragedy of the commons, like we talked about the buffalo herd, right? The elephant herds and all that stuff. It's the same thing with fish, right? There's a better incentive to take care of the population of fish if they're privately held. They become essentially a herd, just like cattle farmers. They want to grow the asset value of the herd. It would be similar with fish. Okay? And I know people say, well, there's all kinds of complications. Of course there's complications. They're not exactly the same, and it's not been done yet, so it'd have to get figured out. But I don't understand why people think, well, it's just impossible. It's not impossible just because it hasn't yet been done. It just means it hasn't yet been done. It doesn't necessarily, you can't necessarily conclude that it is in fact impossible, and I would argue it likely is possible. Walter Block says water is just fast-moving land, and land is just real slow-moving water. They're the same. He's written books about land, about water rights, and all this stuff. He's a brilliant man, obviously. So let me wrap this up, because I know we're getting too long. Was there something there you wanted to comment on, something that piqued your interest, Brad?
Yeah, I'm trying to get my head around privately owning one species.
Yeah, that would...
That's taken me to a new level of trying to understand how that would work and how that would benefit, but I'll ponder that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, right? Again, maybe it can't be made done well in practice. Maybe it just can't. But it's something to think about, right, as an alternative, because we know really what's happening now is so many species of fish are being overfished. Why? Because they're a tragedy of the commons. You get out there as a fisherman, you don't want to go out there and go, well, I'm just going to leave these fish because I'm hoping they'll be here, for later generations. Well, if you don't pick them up, what happens if the next fisherman scoops them up? You just passed up fish and you burn fuel for nothing, right?
Right.
There has to be a better way. And again, I think that's it's incumbent on the free market to come up with that, and why the entrepreneurs are the ones who can do it. If the hunters can get together and do Ducks Unlimited and purchase properties to protect the population of ducks, I'm saying there's other ways to do this with fish that I'm not seeing at the moment, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. So let me just wrap this up as quickly as I can. We'll go back to water for a sec. This is my big conclusion, by the way. The supply of water, especially in California, would likely be better aligned with demand if all property rights were respected, if water and water rights were privatized. The policymakers, elected or not, have a miserable track record regarding the environment. Look at where the situation is today. Many systems and laws that they orchestrated have led directly to many disasters, right? Creating a public good in drinking water, causing shortages by not allowing the price to float so people understand what's scarce, what's not, when to seek alternatives, when not to, right? They did not upgrade the infrastructure when the population increased, right? All these things add together that create a disaster. And now what are they doing? They're knee-jerk reacting and saying, hey, we're going to fine you for not reducing your water consumption some arbitrary percentage. That seems crazy. So if I was a big water waster before and I was able easily to eliminate my waste, I don't face a fine. Somebody who is a miser with water, who has a very difficult time decreasing his water usage significantly, he faces fines, right? It seems absolutely arbitrary. And here's the deal. Remember the beginning of the show. The question is, what's man's role relative to the environment, right? Is he supposed to master his environment and use it for his greatest enjoyment and convenience? Or is he supposed to preserve it? Here's an interesting thing. This question is actually not answerable by freedom, the philosophy of freedom. You're like, why did you ask a question that's not answerable using this philosophy? Because I think people always see these as essentially policy issues. How are we going to do this? Right? And I would argue to some degree in the collectivism, when I say collectivism, forced collectivism wouldn't exist in a free society. The bottom line is each man has to answer that for himself. I'm going to be a pig or I'm going to be a neatnik. I don't know how to describe it, right? And if I think we're all better off if we pollute less, I need to convince you. If you have a manufacturing facility, say, hey, if your product costs 3% more, I will buy that product as long as you can prove to me that you are polluting less as a result of that increase that I'd be willing to pay, right? I'd be willing to support that as a consumer, right? Those producers could do the market research and find that out, right? So you would have the opportunity with your dollar, essentially, to vote for how you wanted things manufactured, how you want them distributed, what you think is environmentally more in tune with your goals, right? So there is no we, in a sense, in a free society, other than using education, persuasion, and ultimately cooperation, not coercion. Right? Adherence to property rights will favor the environment to the greatest practical degree. Right? It's not saying there'll be no, piggy people. There probably will be some, but the point is there'd be less. Again, if they had an interest in the asset value versus not having an interest in the asset value. And the other thing is, of course, that we talked about already was municipalization of waste, placing water management under the political realm. Holding buffalo and elephants in the commons causes the tragedy of the commons. Privatization incentivizes herd management and preservation. Again, I think Dr. Walter Block is dead on this. I think he's fighting a very large uphill battle because it's commonplace to believe, well, if I think there should be more conservation, we just force people to do it. Right? Use the state apparatus to get to where we want. And I think that's a giant mistake. And I would say history shows that it doesn't work, or at least it certainly hasn't worked. And I think that's what got us to the situation we're in. More of the same, I don't see that as working for us or making life better. With that, Brad, do you want to just do the close and let us go for the evening?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for all your good work. Everybody, thanks for listening to us on the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We greatly appreciate it. We would appreciate if you would even pass along our little show to your friends. As Tom always says, pass along to your friends or, heck, even your enemies. Our next episode is next week, Tuesday, April 28th at 7 p.m. Central Time.
Yep.
Free Range Children live with Northwoods Mom. And we hope that we, as always, one of our our themes here is we hope that we provoked you to think. Make your comments on the Facebook page. We welcome them. And again, thank you all for listening. We greatly appreciate it. Look forward to the next discussion. And until next time, say goodnight, Tom. I'm
going to say goodnight. This has been another episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show, and we're going to leave you with the River Jordan tonight. Here we go.
I'm gonna take it down the Jordan where the current runs lean. The river runs dirty, some things are never clean. There's a man in a camel skin on a bank outside of town. They baptize some while others sink drowned. God blesses some more than others, I hear. But I ain't never seen him in his long gray beard. Some call murder, others call suicide. Some think it righteous when it flows a crimson tide. God bless the soldiers, every day they stay alive. Some think it holy if in his name they die. Boys, let me tell you that when cousins start to fight, an eye for an eye gets sanctified.